Today, John's going to be exploring whether New South Wales was intended as a hemp colony, whether the convict sort of plan was just really a cover for making sure that the British Empire, had a good source of hemp. So, please welcome Dr. John Jiggens.
Yeah, look, I'm Dr. John Jiggens. I normally introduce myself as I'm a minor god of cannabis because I've written so much about the book. The problem, well, I did have a speech already written out for this, but I've lost my shoulder bag which contains my speech. But I think it's just a message from, well, the Lords of Karma that I should be less anal and just speak without notes. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'll tell you a bit about how I first became interested in the history of cannabis. And it happens, it happens, what the, okay. Yeah, it happens because back in 1995, we toured Jack Herer, who's the author of The Emperor Wears No Clothes, and we put out an Australian edition of The Emperor Wears No Clothes. The Emperor Wears No Clothes calls itself The Amazing True Story of, well, our edition says, of the world's most useful plant and the conspiracy to destroy it. The American one sort of has the first 5 words and just changes it a bit. Jack Herer had been a cannabis activist. He, in fact, is one of the founders of Hemp. Hemp stands for Help End Marijuana Prohibition. It's been rebranded as legalised cannabis for the elections, but it still continues as a social group as Hemp, and I think that's the best way to do it. I always opposed the idea of having a political party called Hemp because I thought it would be good if we had a social group which everyone from all different political groups could join, and then the political party, which is what we've got now. So Hemp means Help End Marijuana Prohibition. Herer in his activism ran into these people who told him that marijuana was also this plant called hemp, and that it had once been one of the most famous plants on the planet, but all the memory of it had disappeared. So, I'll just check to see where I'm up to. So in his research into the history of hemp in the United States, Jack Herer discovered that the early presidents, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, had grown hemp, and the 6th president, John Quincy Adams, who was the son of the 2nd president, had actually written a book on the cultivation of hemp in Russia. And so he then concluded that hemp must have been a really important plant, which is true. And one of the things I discovered was that not only were the founding fathers of the US hemp enthusiasts, so were the founding fathers of New South Wales. And you have to realise, why was hemp such an important product then? I think Jack Herer referred to it as the not the most useful, but the most valuable plant on the planet, or the premier plant on the planet. And that was because it was the age of sale. And in the age of sale, all the sails and the rope and the sort of anchor hawsers, I think they call them, the big rope for the anchors, were made from hemp. Because hemp is the strongest natural long vegetable fibre. So it was really important for that. Britain's empire was based on naval power. And there's a theory, if you get into the theory of empires, that a sea power will always defeat a land power. Like that's Admiral Mahan, who's an American admiral, round about the late 19th to early 20th century. He writes a whole series of books on this, but it's just based on what happened with the British Empire, because the British Empire becomes great and has an empire because it's such a dominant naval power. And if you look at the past 500 years of the history of this world, you'll find that ever since the Europeans actually got that sort of the technology of the age of sail together, that they went round and just dominated and created all these empires throughout the other continents. The first one is famously the Portuguese Empire, then you have the Spanish Empire, then you have the Dutch Empire, and then you have the British and the French Empire who duke it out, and the British win by 1815. So, and that era has started to come to a close now. And what we're seeing at the moment, like the Russia-NATO war, is one between the Western European powers, the Atlanticists, those who lived on the Atlantic side of Eurasia and then moved out with their ships, who discovered that the ocean is one continuous ocean, and were able to then go out and dominate all these other countries. And that's the stage we're going through at the moment, I guess, is the fight between the Atlanticists and the people whose lands they invaded in the rest of the world. So I tend to lose myself. So let's move on to... this is the book Rich has written about the founding of Australia. It's called Sir Joseph Banks and the Question of Hemp. Now, Sir Joseph Banks comes out with Cook on the voyage with Cook, the first voyage where they're going out supposedly for this scientific process of measuring the transit of Venus in 1769, and they're looking for a place in the southern hemisphere where they can look for it. So they go to Tahiti, which is then called the Friendly Islands, because basically the young women give all the sailors quite a lot of sex in exchange for bits of nails and iron and things like that. So in return they get VD, unfortunately, so not a great bargain. So that's where he goes from, and then he sort of sails to New Zealand. He circumnavigates New Zealand, and then he discovers the east coast of Australia, and they then sort of proceed up the east coast. So Banks, and when Banks and Cook come back, it's taken them 3 years, and they're sort of like astronauts in our era, like they're just real celebrities. So for Banks, it's, how his sort of name is made. Banks himself came from a very rich family. His families had become rich from being lawyers and parliamentarians and had bought quite a lot of land. And his father dies when he's 18. He's born 1743. So he suddenly becomes this really wealthy young man. And he's the one, he does a bit of, and he's obsessed with botany. Well, botany is really huge in the 18th century. You've got Linnaeus sort of doing the Linnaeus system of classification of plants. And that's the start of it then. And Banks is trained in the Linnaean system, and he brings with him other botanists on that. Now, the thing to remember about the voyage of the Endeavour is King George III puts 3,000 pounds into it, Banks contributes £10,000. He buys all this scientific equipment for it. He has a crew of he has a team of 8 people who are sharing part of the cabins. He's got 2 botanists, one of whom is Solander. He's got 2 illustrators, one of whom is Parkinson. He's got 2 of his tenants from Revesby, which is a large block of land in England. He owns, and he's got 2 Negro servants. So he's got, and instead of going for the big thing for rich young men then was to go on a grand tour of Europe. So what Banks arranges is a grand tour of the world. And he gets the chance to do, it is an amazing scientific expedition. But one of the things he's doing is he's collecting the weapons and the clothing, the sails, the rope, essentially the hemp of all the cultures he meets. And this is obviously, when the British Empire starts, that becomes quite important. But let's get into the British Empire starting. All right. Okay, well, one thing we should explain about hemp, or what's called European hemp, is that Russia totally dominates production of it. All the hemp that the British use for their ships, and a first-rate man of war will take 80 tons of hemp just to fit it out with sails and ropes. So they have huge quantities of hopes. They around about 20,000 tons of hemp they import every year just to outfit their merchant navy and the Royal Navy, because these are the basis of British power. But so there's this strategic weakness that all the hemp that Britain gets comes from St. Petersburg and Riga, which are the main Russian ports, and they come out through the Baltic Sea, they pass Copenhagen, and then they go into England. So if you want to defeat Britain in the 18th century, you need to defeat the Royal Navy, and the way to do that is to cut hemp supplies, because there is just this narrow passage through the Baltic where you can attack the British and destroy hemp supplies. And this is the reason they lose the US Revolutionary War. In 1780, the Russians form what's called the Confederacy of the North, or the Armed Neutrality it's called. The British just seize other people's ships if they're enemy ships in wartime. This is, Britannia rules the waves. This is, the waves, the oceans are British. And so they just seize other people's cargoes. And they do that in the Baltic. They seize, the Russians' hemp and other people's hemp. And so the Russians get pissed off with this, and they organise a blockade of the hemp supplies going to Britain. And as a consequence of that, the British are in a very difficult position. They've got 26 colonies in America. There's 13, and the Caribbean. They've got 2 colonies in Canada, 13 in the US, and quite a lot of Caribbean islands. So they're forced into this position of moving their fleet in the US to the Caribbean, because that's where all their money comes from. So as a consequence of that, they lose their first empire. And that's a really huge strategic defeat for the British. And it sort of sets off an existential crisis in the thinking of the people who controlled England. And what makes it even worse is the Russians then decide that they'll form a cartel. This is with the consent of Catherine the Great, who's Tsar then. And from about 1782 to 1786, the Russians sort of have got a cartel and they force the price of hemp up. And it, I think, doubles in price during this period. So now you need to get this timetable in. To understand the foundation of New South Wales, you have to look at how close all this is happening in time. By 1780, well, they lose the war, generally it's said in 1783, but things are looking bad from 1781 onwards. So they've lost their first empire, and then they've got this problem of the Russians sort of jacking up the price of hemp. So, and they realise that, you know, their empire is based on sea power. And so they start looking for other sources of hemp. And this is why New South Wales is formed as a hemp colony. This is the reasons for it. Round about this time, in 1783, there's a man called James Matra who's been a midshipman on the Endeavour when Banks was there, and he becomes part of Banks's circle. The whole plan for Australia is, or for New South Wales, is formed by Banks and his circle. And they originally propose a scheme whereby the American colonists who supported the British, like it was a civil war in the American Revolutionary War, and quite a lot of people supported the British, then their opponents win. And there's a sort of boat people exodus from the US as it becomes, round about then, and there's a question of what you can do with them. So the first scheme is to get them and start a colony in Botany Bay for the production of hemp. Then there's this other scheme, which I suppose I'll leave the other scheme out, and then I'll discuss that later. So then when the idea of sort of moving the convicts happens, they combine the two schemes, and there's a third scheme which I'm going to talk about later. And that's how what's called the Heads of a Plan gets written. Now, I'll introduce you to, I think I'm up to Heads of a Plan. So I have to do this. So what is the Heads of the Plan? Heads of a Plan is the foundational document for New South Wales. It's the document that's sent to the British Cabinet in 1786, and it passes on August the 18th, 1786. So 3 years after they lose the American Revolutionary War, they're starting the plans for New South Wales. It takes, and it's not generally recognised just how epic the founding of New South Wales was. Now, when I say it's epic, what I mean by that is Sydney is 24,000 miles from Portsmouth or wherever they leave from. There are 1,400 people in the First Fleet. I think there's 7 ships. They've got 750 convicts and their relatives. They've got around about 300 Marine Guards. There's 250 Marine Guards with about 50 dependents. So there's another 300 there. And there's about 250 to 300 sailors doing it. So that's the problem they're doing. You've got to move 1,400 people to the other side of the world. And it's unlike anything else, any voyage before it. Like, it is just an epic effort. So one of the questions is, why are they doing this? And the conventional story is they're just doing it to give a place to house 750 convicts. But, you know, just the amount of money that it involves has always... Australian historians have always, or not all Australian historians, the oppositional school of Australian historians, have always maintained that there's got to be some other reason for the First Fleet. It just doesn't make sense that you'd do such a huge effort just to house 750 convicts. So, heads of a plan. Okay, that's what we're doing at the moment. So that's what heads of a plan is. It's, if you want to find out why New South Wales is colonised, then heads of the plan is the main documentation we have with it. We've got mattress plans and this other plan which as well, but really there isn't much documentation on the reason for the colonisation of New South Wales. Heads of a plan's very short. It's only about 15 paragraphs, 1,100 words or something like that. And most of those 1,100 words is based on that question of how you're going to achieve moving 1,400 people from England to the other side of the world, just outfitting them, working out how many Marines, etc. So most of it, of those 15 paragraphs, is concerned with just the logistics of developing a colony on the other side of the world. And the last two paragraphs are the ones which give you the explanation for it. Like, there's no explanation for it except the last two paragraphs, and I've got them up here. It may not be amiss to remark in favour of this plan that considerable advantage will arise from the cultivation of the New Zealand hemp or flax plant in the new intended settlement, the supply of which would be of great consequence to us as a naval power, as our manufacturers are of opinion that canvas made of it would be superior in strength and beauty to any canvas made of the European material, and that a cable of the circumference of 10 inches made from the former would be superior in strength to one of 18 inches made of the latter. The threads or filaments of this New Zealand plant are formed by nature with the most exquisite delicacy and may be so minutely divided as to be manufactured into the finest linen. So that's it, like that's all the proof I need for my claim that New South Wales is founded as a hemp colony. The tricky thing in it is it's not for European hemp, it's for New Zealand hemp, although they grow quite a lot, well, they attempt to grow quite a lot of European hemp as well. So what is New Zealand hemp? And it's that plant there, a plant you would have seen all around the place. It's a really common, well domesticated. But it was, it's a different sort of hemp from cannabis hemp. The word hemp, as well as meaning the European cannabis plant, came to be used for all long vegetable fibres. So New Zealand hemp, or New Zealand flax, Banks maintained, the reason for Banks' enthusiasm for it is that's what he researches. He's been going around the world, he's been looking at all the hemps of the cultures, and he's discovered what he thinks is the best hemp. And because hemp is the centre, it's in the age of sale, it's the key commodity, just as oil is the key commodity in our age. Hemp's the basis for trade and for warfare. So it's real, well, it goes hemp, coal, oil, and I don't know what the new strategic material is. It could be artificial intelligence, I'm not sure on that. But that's the sort of history of that 500 years of European colonisation. They've been the most important products because they are most important for warfare and trade. So, sorry? It's called Formium tenax. There's about 630 varieties, and this is one of them. Now, I have to check on something to see where I am. Oh, just at heads of a plan, I've done that. All right, now let's get into New Zealand hemp. Oh, that's Banks at the just before he sets out on his trip around the world. So that's the young Banks. And when he comes back from his voyage on the Endeavour, Joseph Banks was painted by Benjamin West circa 1773, wearing a Maori cloak made from the New Zealand hemp he championed and surrounded by items gathered on his voyage with Cook. Now, he really does champion it. He does, in his journal of the voyage of the Endeavour, he claims that New Zealand hemp is the most important discovery they make in that particular voyage. And he's collecting things, as I said, like ropes and robes. And this is him wearing the robe of New Zealand hemp. And it does look quite magnificent. You can understand why he was impressed with it. And he also gets various ropes, which they test at Deptford, and they compare it to Russian hemp. And it actually, the ropes he gets gifted to him by the various Maori chiefs, he gets some rope there which is stronger than European hemp. So, although Banks makes this outrageous claim that New Zealand hemp is the most valuable product discovered during Cook's voyage, he's got real basis for it. He's actually got the clothing, he's got ropes he can test, and for that, decade after his journal is published, New Zealand hemp is really famous, and that's why the British are attempting to develop a hemp colony based on New Zealand hemp, and the French are very interested in it too. And La Perouse is sent out to sort of do a bigger version of Cook's expedition by the French in the 1780s. He takes 100 scientists with him. He's got 2 ships. He seems to know where the British are going because he goes to Norfolk Island, and he turns up in Sydney at the same time as the first fleet turn up. The first fleet turn up at Botany Bay, and they see in the distance 2 European ships arriving at the same time, and it's La Perouse. That's why there's a suburb of Sydney called La Perouse. La Perouse gets wiped out very shortly after that. He runs into a cyclone in the Solomon Islands. Both his ships get wrecked in that, and he just disappears. He isn't discovered till about the 1930s sometime. So the French are really interested in it. The British and French are involved in this huge fight for world dominance at this stage. So La Perouse turns up in Sydney at the same time the first fleet does. So Arthur Phillip talks to him and finds out where he's been, and he obviously knows he's been to Botany Bay because he's talking to him, but he's interested whether he's been to Norfolk Island. And La Perouse says he has, but he couldn't land on it. Why Norfolk Island? Norfolk Island is about 1,000 kilometres or 1,000 miles east of Brisbane. It's this tiny speck, about 30 square kilometres in the middle of the Pacific. If you're going to form a colony from Britain anywhere in the world, the most isolated place you could form it is in Norfolk Island, and yet this is what the British do. The reason for this is that Cook, on his second voyage, which is the 1774 voyage, discovers Norfolk Island. He actually claimed to discover this one because it's unsettled. And he notices there's all this New Zealand flax on it, growing all around the edges. And he's familiar with that because he in his first voyage, he's got Banks there, and Banks is just this great supporter of New Zealand hemp. So he notices that. He notices these wonderful Norfolk Island pines. And from this arrives the scheme I haven't been telling you about, which is Admiral Young's scheme. And his scheme is to found a colony in Norfolk Island. And the idea of that colony, will it be a base for naval supplies in the Pacific? They'll have these Norfolk Island pines, which will produce these wonderful spars or masts for the ship, and they'll have all this cordage from the New Zealand hemp thing. So it's the other scheme which is joined into the heads of the plan thing. Because the first thing that happens in Sydney, they arrived January 20th. We celebrated as January the 26th, but that's when they disembark at Sydney Cove. And in March, they send off King to be governor of Norfolk Island. And they send a crew to develop Norfolk Island. And they keep that very secret, because hemp's a strategic material. The French already seem to know about it. They don't publish the directions of Norfolk Island, but La Perouse claims to have been there, so he has discovered it. So it's a vital strategic battle between the French and the British to get control of what they think is the naval supplies of the Pacific. And once you get the naval supplies, you build your empire, because the basis of empires is hemp, which is trade and warfare covered. And that's the part of the plan for Botany Bay which isn't discussed much. It isn't just a convict settlement. The convicts are just there replacing the US refugees as the labour force. The plan is still there to develop what we have today, which is this huge commercial operation in the Pacific. In the 18th century, the commercial operation is based on the Atlantic. The British work it by, they will go down to Africa, pick up slaves, crowd them on these slaving ships, take them over to the Caribbean, grow a lot of sugar and make a lot of rum, then go back to England and sell that. So they are thinking, that's also part of this scheme too, is to develop the Pacific as a new global trading system. And ultimately they do that. Sydney's 1788, Singapore's 1811, 1812. They get Hong Kong 1842, I think. So, gradually, and then they get Vancouver, and there's San Francisco, which the Americans have, etc. So, gradually, that's sort of, there's a replacement of the world economy, which is based on the Atlantic, by the Pacific, which is all part of the scheme, but it's just not announced. Heads of a plan, New Zealand hemp. Oh, yeah. So as I said, the surprising thing is, although New South Wales is a hemp colony, it's supposed to be a colony for New Zealand hemp. How am I going for time? I can't. Where's Kath? She's not here.
Only got 5 minutes.
All right.
And that includes questions.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry, you said 45 and we're up to 40.
Okay, all right, cool. Okay, it's a good thing I lost my notes. Any questions you could ask me about why? Yep.
Okay. I was just wondering with hemp, were the British using all that they could access, or were they also using it as a powerful trading commodity?
Well, no, mainly they've got a huge fleet, and in the coming Napoleonic Wars, they're going to be blockading Europe with 1,000 ships to cut off supplies to the French. So, mainly they use hemp, for sailing purposes. I don't know if they use it for any other purposes. I don't think they do hempcrete or anything like that. Yeah.
Any other questions? Because definitely John, of course, is here at the event today, so if you do have any more questions, and his amazing book, Sir Joseph Banks and the Question of Hemp, you can get it from the Hemp Embassy. It's a really amazing work.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that's just pictures of Banks with his friends and Cook. Anyway, yeah, that one's not all that important. No one's got a question?
We've got one more here, so we'll make this the last question.
Okay.
So I've been growing hemp all around Australia, and that's why I'm talking next. But was the Hunter Valley one of the originals? Because they say it just went wild along the Hunter River. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, that's the story I don't get into. But very quickly, they have a lot of trouble transporting hemp from England to Australia because it's an 8-month journey at sea, and it doesn't get destroyed. Now, Banks, the New Zealand hemp experiment fails. Banks then decides that they're going to do hemp in India. He's got a botanist there called Roxburgh who tells him that the Indians grow a lot of hemp in their gardens, but they don't use it for cordage. They seem to use it as a drug like opium. So eventually they get the idea that they'll supply Australia. So what Roxburgh sort of says is, the Indians are just stupid. They don't realise they've got the best long fibre plant in the planet growing there, but we intelligent British do. These just idiots are just smoking it and behaving like fools. And so they attempt to turn what's ganja, bung, into hemp. And there's a big breeding process. It turns out the Indians are right and the British are wrong, and it's just a fibre crop. It isn't a good fibre crop, it's awfully good as a drug crop. But because they're having this trouble with supplying it from England, they eventually start growing quite a lot of hemp in Australia, but they're growing what the Indians have sent them, which is an Indian hemp, which is ganja, basically adapted to be used as a hemp. It's not very good, it's half the strength. Well, half the strength as a fibre, not in terms of drug terms. And so what happens, and the people who found the Hunter Valley of the Bell family, there's, in 1819, there's a guy called, with the great name of John Thomas Bigg, sorry, I'm going too long. He is set to do a review of the colony of New South Wales, and the Bell family are the ones who argue for it being a place for hemp and flax. And then another one of the Bell families finds one of the paths into the Hunter, in the Upper Hunter, from the Blue Mountains. I think it's still called the Bell Way. And they start growing hemp there. So all that hemp which is discovered in the Hunter Valley is probably India, this sort of weird Indian hemp that Roxburgh's been developed. So it's actually quite, theoretically, it's supposed to be quite a good smoke, That's where the first lot of cannabis smoking in Australia happens in 1964 when they discover this huge outcrop of hemp which is run wild in the Hunter Valley, and you get this group called the weed raiders who start raiding it, etc. So yeah, the Hunter Valley is very interesting because it's one of the first really big places. Okay,
thank you so much, John. I know that you could talk for a long time on this, so thank you very much for warming us up today as well. It's really lovely. Thank you.